I'll give you guys a quick overview of how I got to EcoEngineers and then what EcoEngineers does, and then talk about the carbon credit markets that are driving some of this development, but also and kind of talk about um, the changes. I have a case study slide in here that kind of shows how projects may have been funded or developed um, as recently as 2 or 3 months ago, and then the next slide kind of shows the things that have changed within the past 3 to 6 months that might change where or how or what type of project is developed. And then I'd invite the Agri team to go ahead and jump in at the end of my presentation, because I think um, the thing about the Agri team that we see from our vantage point is just the uniqueness and their ability to find ways to develop projects that otherwise may not fit cleanly into someone else's very quick screening tool of yes, we can do this, or no, we can't. And I think that makes them a really unique partner, and have known the team for a number of years, even before I joined EcoEngineers. So I'm going to try to present my slides here. Let me know if this works the way it should.
I think we've got it, Dave.
Awesome. So first, I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. It's nice to meet everyone, and hopefully this is informative. And I know it's tough to fit a lot of information in a short time, so always available to answer questions. And I can make these slides available to everyone and provide my contact information as well. So as I said, I'm Dave Lindenmuth, the Renewable Natural Gas Services Director at EcoEngineers. A little bit of background: I live in Pennsylvania, about an hour outside of Philadelphia, and grew up in Pennsylvania, so familiar with the Northeast and the Pennsylvania, New York marketplaces. I spent the majority of my career in traditional energy space, so natural gas utilities, both gas and electric markets, and then for a number of years working with retail energy consumers, so like small and mid-sized manufacturing and other companies, trying to help them navigate the energy markets and bring solutions to them, whether it be energy contracts for electricity or natural gas. And then about 5 years ago, was working at UGI actually, and helping them determine how they were going to move forward in the renewable space, and found that renewable natural gas and projects in this space were something that UGI wanted to make investments in and build some partnerships. And so I actually hired the EcoEngineers team to help me understand and navigate these markets and build a team understanding of how renewable natural gas projects are built, and how the feedstocks are really contracted, and then how projects are developed. So met a number of development partners during my time there. Rashi was one of them, and it started the relationship. I had decided to move to EcoEngineers as the transaction was kind of moving forward with UGI and Agrid, but I was very happy to see that partnership, and again, two really strong companies that have a focus on building long-term partnerships, and not just transactional type work. And so that's how I ended up at EcoEngineers, had the opportunity to join as the EcoEngineers team expands, and really lead the renewable natural gas practice, and try to help people develop more projects across the country, and also help to build knowledge, understanding, and potential growth into new carbon credit markets, giving sort of more options to projects, and helping projects navigate where they can be successful. So a little bit about EcoEngineers. There's a lot of engineers on staff at EcoEngineers, and me personally have a background in chemical engineering, but we're not a design build firm. We don't design and size pumps and figure out the construction side of things. We're really an independent consulting and audit firm, and our start was in 2009, headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa, really focused on ethanol in the beginning. So ethanol plants, as they expanded into Iowa and started expanding their production, were looking for ways to make sure that the work they were doing and the environmental impact they were having was measured, and that they were generating credits in the space for it, and that the buyers of those credits felt comfortable that they were coming from a legitimate source. And so the company really started in that audit space to prove to the buyers and sellers of these credits that get generated as you produce ethanol that they were legitimate and you could stand behind them. And then as we built relationships in that space, our customers started asking more and more for advice. And so the consulting team was built adjacent to the audit team to kind of help customers start to navigate the regulations, changes in the regulations, and making sure that they had a partner to help them through some of these audit processes. And so now the company is still somewhat balanced, but actually the consulting team is actually bigger now than even our audit team is. We really are expanding beyond the renewable fuel space, trying to move into a number of areas of looking at future fuels like sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen, and electricity is one of those that was popular before and sort of lost favor, and as Sarashi and Abu said, is now coming back again. So I think that's an interesting development, and it's very relevant in the New York clean fuels legislation that's moving forward. And so we also work a lot with the agricultural and farming industry, trying to help measure and quantify the impacts that these projects have sort of beyond the energy portion of the project, and understand as you make improvements to your process, or make improvements on the digestate side or on the fertilizer side of things, that you find ways to get credit for that, and then not just get credit for it, but potentially find a revenue stream for it. We've worked with hundreds of projects across the country, helping them get registered in the program, and also understand whether or not their projects fit into certain programs or not. Just so a little bit about how we approach working with clients. We really don't have a technology to sell. We don't have, we're not taking a share in the project. We don't actually buy and sell or share the credit values. So we're not a broker. We don't take a fee in that way. If we partner with someone, we're really there to be an advisor. So we're hired as a consultant by the entity that hires us, and we try to give you the best advice and help you navigate your project or your business through regulations or partnerships with others who are going to help you build projects. We have one of the benefits I think that Eco has to help projects is really that we get to see a lot of projects develop from sort of the concept to commissioning stage, and so we can help you understand the different technologies that are out there, the partners that are out there, contract structures that are out there, and which one may be right for you or your project, as it varies, widely on how much you want to be involved, how much risk you want to take. And so there's a lot of different ways to participate in these markets and find value. And I think really it's about finding who are the partners and what's the structure that works best for you and your farm. A little bit about, this is kind of explaining the carbon markets that we'll talk about and the whys. So as governments and environmental policy looks to decarbonize and make improvements to the overall greenhouse gas emissions goals that are being set, the reason that a lot of policies are focused on transportation markets and fueling for vehicles is really because it's the largest contributor in the United States. And so if you're going to tackle the two areas where the highest amount of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, looking at that transportation sector and looking at the power generation sector are the two areas where you see most of this policy. And then, moving down into those other areas will likely be next steps, but this is why you see most of the policy focused around transportation vehicles and the power or electricity sectors. This is really just kind of a reference slide. I just talk about it real quick, but these are the 6 sort of service areas that EcoEngineers participates in. We do a lot of work on the training and education area, and really just working on developing workshops for our customers and helping them get educated in this space. And we can kind of talk about these later after we talk about the carbon credits and the projects if anybody has questions. But really, I think the different service areas that we have internally are really about helping projects move from the concept of we have an idea for a project. How does that project move through the processes of making sure they're going to be able to participate in a certain market, where the revenues from those markets are going to come from, how do you get registered and start participating in them, and then on an ongoing basis, how do you maintain compliance, whether it's, required tracking of data or making sure that you're putting in registrations and filings on time, all the way through that process, and then the required audits that a lot of these programs have in place to make sure that you're continuing to generate credits under an approved methodology. And we'll talk about what life cycle analysis means and why it's important in some of these markets, and kind of talk about that in context of the California market and the other markets as well. I'm going to skip that slide real quick and go to the carbon credit markets themselves. So as we look at the 2 programs in the United States right now that have offered the highest value for projects have been the US EPA's Renewable Fuel Standard program. And this was really developed over a decade ago to focus on the development of renewable fuels domestically, displace the import of foreign oil, and find a way to lower the carbon intensity of, or the amount of greenhouse gases overall that are emitted from the transportation sector. So those were really the goals of the program. And ethanol is the largest portion of that program, and subsequently the use of waste from landfills and from the agricultural sector has been the second largest contributor to this program, and the credits and it's really driven a lot of development in the renewable natural gas space, and is one of the main drivers as to why, over the past 10 years there's been significant investment in the transition of these different waste streams into biogas, and then cleaning that biogas to pipeline quality and injecting it into the U.S. natural gas grid. And so the 2 pathways under this program that allow for credit generation are these two pathways. And so the EPA essentially set out by rule the different feedstocks that can be converted, either really through the anaerobic digestion process, generating biogas, and then that biogas gets cleaned and injected into a pipeline. The other portion of this program that I think is something that is sometimes missed is that is the first step in the generation of one of these credits. The second step is that somewhere interconnected within the United States gas grid, a vehicle that's using compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas to displace or essentially have a fuel tank that's using natural gas instead of diesel fuel or gasoline. It has to be filled with natural gas to then complete essentially this cycle of fuel production and then fuel use in the transportation sector. And I think sometimes it's kind of assumed on the production side that, I just produce this fuel and I get a credit. And that's not really the way that the market works. The way the market works is you produce the fuel and then you find a partner that has capability to use that fuel in a vehicle. And when the fuel is actually used in the vehicle is when the credit, the environmental credit, is actually generated. And the reason for that is the program is all about displacing gasoline and diesel fuel in the market. And so you just producing a renewable fuel does not, provide you the credit or the ability to generate a credit. In the United States today, there is still more, it's surprising, but there is a lot more CNG fuel dispensing that is available and is not being partnered with a renewable fuel yet. So there are still partners out there that have capacity that are looking for renewable fuel to match with their compressed natural gas fleets and use renewable fuel to generate these credits. And then we'll talk about, sort of the now situation, and then the rules in these programs are constantly changing. And I think that's also one of the challenges for projects, is making sure that you stay up to date on what's the latest news, what are the latest advancements, and what impact is that having on the marketplace. So the other piece of this is that feedstock matters. So you can see the definitions here under these two different pathways. They dictate what the feedstocks are that you can use to generate the gas. And then the D code at the end of this pathway essentially tells you what type of credit is getting generated. And those credits have different values in the marketplace. So the feedstocks that are here in this top pathway that talk about gas from landfill, municipal digesters, and then agricultural digesters, they generate a D3 RIN, which is the highest value RIN in the marketplace. And the RIN is the name of the credit. The renewable natural gas, which is biogas from waste digesters, can generate an RFS or RIN credit. It's generally a little bit lower value credit, the D5 credit. And this would be a lot of your diverted food waste. So if you have a food waste digester that's pure food waste and the food waste qualifies under the EPA definitions, then you would be generating this slightly lower D5 credit, but still is eligible within the program. I know that's kind of a lot and it's complicated, and I'll talk about the next steps here in renewable electricity. But does anybody have any questions before I kind of move to the electricity piece of this? Okay, so you can see here that within these pathways there was the use of this fuel within the renewable compressed natural gas, renewable liquefied natural gas, and you can see that it also said renewable electricity. And for nearly a decade, the pathway for generating electricity and then using that electricity in electric vehicles was a approved pathway. It always existed in the EPA program. However, 8 to 9 years ago, EcoEngineers actually helped a few developers file pathways with the EPA for approval, as is the process. And those applications have been sitting with the EPA for around 8 years. And none of the renewable electricity pathways were ever approved. And the EPA told those applicants that they had concerns around double counting and trying to figure out how and what the pathway for connecting this electricity that would go into the grid to the actual charging of electric vehicles. And because that's a highly distributed process where people can buy an electric vehicle and potentially charge it in their garage overnight, the EPA was concerned of who gets the value of these credits and how will they make sure that there's no fraud or duplication of charging data or other pieces of information. On the renewable natural gas side, it's a little bit easier because it's fueling a CNG vehicle usually happens at a CNG fueling station. There's a significant investment that kind of goes into those fueling stations. There's hundreds of fueling stations, not thousands or millions of them, and so it's easier for the EPA to track. Yes, UPS or Amazon has this large CNG fleet. They fill it at their station overnight, and they can kind of track, with gas meters and things like that, how much fuel is being used. If you have millions of residential electric vehicles on the road, that posed a bigger challenge for the EPA. At the end of December, or right around the 1st of December of 2022, the EPA provided a 1,000-page document that has a lot of new proposals in it and sort of tweaks of existing rules, but a big portion of that proposal that they're working through right now gave clarity to this renewable electricity pathway. And the thought in the marketplace is that what everyone's hearing and what the EPA is signaling is that the rule that they have proposed, they've taken public comment on it, and they hope to finalize it sometime this summer with the ability for these pathways to start getting registered and generating credits as early as January 2024. So about 7 months from now. So this is a huge change in the industry. I mean, people have been waiting for this for a long time. And so there's a lot of excitement and development and planning that's going into projects that qualify for this, that are generating electricity today or could generate electricity in the near term, to start taking advantage of these credit pathways. And one advantage is that it generally requires a lower capital investment, and most places have electricity or access to the electricity grid, where sometimes they don't have that access on the natural gas grid, or it's really expensive to upgrade the gas and connect it into the gas grid. So I think for smaller projects, this is even a better benefit than for certain other large projects. And the way that the EPA has laid this out is that the renewable fuel producer who generates electricity will essentially match their electricity production with a contract for the manufacturers of electric vehicles. So it's not data from charging stations or people's home electric bills or anything like that. They're literally going to take the amount of vehicles sold by Ford, GM, Tesla that are electric vehicles, and then they're going to put a standard math equation to it to say, generally these vehicles are, driven 8,000 miles a year. They charge a certain number of times and they use a certain number of kilowatt hours of electricity. And so those vehicle manufacturers will essentially aggregate that math equation, and match their fleet size and essentially math used of fuel per, electricity used for charging their electric vehicles, and match that with the electric fuel, the electric fuel produced. And then those two entities will share in the value of the generation of this credit. Oftentimes there'll be, sort of a brokering party in the middle who can help match all of these different renewable fuel projects to, someone like a Tesla or GM who really doesn't, this is a small part of their business and they just kind of want to turn it over to someone to manage for them. So that's how we're seeing the market develop currently. But I think it's a great opportunity for projects to access a credit that otherwise couldn't have been accessed in the past. Then there is a second program that has really driven, substantial development in the agricultural space. And so the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard was a program that is focused on lowering the emissions from vehicles in California. The program is based on the overall carbon intensity of a fuel. So essentially, California said, we want to reward fuels who are innovating in a way that is bringing the lowest amount of emissions from the entire production and use of the fuel. So the whole life cycle of the fuel. So instead of just looking at, is the fuel produced from a renewable source, or is it coming from, zero emissions electricity? They really wanted to reward fuels that from all the way from the production or transportation of the feedstock used to produce the fuel, the energy used in the production of a fuel or refinement of it, all the way through to the consumption of that fuel in the vehicle. Whoever can build or develop the lowest, the fuel that emits the lowest emissions or the least amount of emissions over the entire production cycle of their fuel will be rewarded most. And the way that works for agricultural facilities is that the agricultural facilities and manure really focused facilities, if you are improving manure management practices that at one time potentially emitted greenhouse gas emissions in the form of methane or CO2 into the atmosphere, and you're now improving your practice to stop that, you actually get a large credit within the calculator. And this has made manure projects throughout the United States very attractive for the California market. The math is pretty complicated. There's a tool that was developed at the Department of Energy Argonne Labs that calculates the benefit of these improved manure management practices, and that's a lot of work that EcoEngineers does. We've got a large staff that calculates and can determine what the overall score of a project is and how much value it's going to fetch in the California program. But generally, if a dairy farm had an open lagoon where manure was in that lagoon for a certain amount of time, essentially the methane that was emitted from that lagoon is something that the California Air Resources Board or the California LCFS program wanted that practice to stop. They wanted to incentivize people to cover that lagoon, capture the methane potential from it, and use it for a beneficial source. And so that's why you saw significant and continue to see significant investment in dairy or swine manure projects, where these projects score very well in the marketplace. They actually have a negative score because the rules essentially are saying you're taking more emissions out of the atmosphere than you're putting in by generating this fuel using manure that otherwise would have been just emitting greenhouse gas emissions. And so really this fuel from dairy farms or from swine farms are the only projects that have a negative score. And the negative score is a really attractive thing because you generate more and more credits the lower your score. So it's a complicated market, but it's also one that has provided a lot of value to projects in this space. And there are programs that are being developed and have been approved in other states that are built very much like the California program. So Oregon has essentially a program that looks exactly like California. The state of Washington is launching a program as well. And Canada also has two programs. They've got one, the Canadian Clean Fuel Regulation, and then British Columbia actually has its own low carbon fuel standard program. So California is definitely a model for what other states seem to be doing, and that proves that I think there will continue to be rewards for agricultural projects moving into the future. Here's a quick comparison of the different fuels. As I said, the ones that in this program, the lower the score, the more credits you generate. So you can see these animal waste digesters that are being used for renewable natural gas and then dispensed in CNG vehicles in California have very low scores compared to gas coming from a landfill or from just, natural gas out of the natural gas system. And so this is where the overwhelming, number of dollars have gone in the renewable natural gas space, is to develop projects in this space. Another thing to mention is with these two programs, because one is a federal program, the RFS program, and one is the California state program, you are able to stack these credits. And so California has been an extremely attractive place to try to place your fuel, because you can generate this federal credit, the RIN credit, and generate the California LCFS credit for your project, and stack those two things together and get revenue from really three sources. One being the actual, physical fuel you're producing and putting in the pipeline, and these two different credit programs. I would mention, since Agrid has a lot of experience here, is that there are some projects in the food waste and green waste that can qualify and get some of these credits as well, and can actually be slightly negative within the California program. This is I would say, one of the more complicated calculations within the program, is the definition of the manure management practices in the animal waste industry, and then also these food and green waste projects. It takes a lot of effort to understand and classify these things in the calculator and really derive, where your project stands.
Dave, how many people have actually approved a food waste project? There's just been very few, right?
There's been very few, and there's a lot of challenges in them. There are, I think, two California-based projects that are using food waste. There's one of the biggest challenges is not necessarily from the California regulation. Within the federal regulation for food waste, the EPA has asked for a lot of compliance tracking with the source of the food waste. And so as that food waste starts to come from more sources, it becomes more and more complicated to trace where that food waste was actually coming from. So if you have an industrial food waste where you've got a yogurt manufacturing facility and they're sending you, 90% of their stuff comes to you, and that's 90% of what you're using, that's potentially easier. But as you start to get, people sign up and say, okay, Starbucks from all over New York City is going to send me their food waste every day, and we're going to consume it in the digester. EPA wants to know every single Starbucks waste bin location, their address, and have someone sign an affidavit that the food waste was really food waste and you weren't diverting other things into there. So it becomes a real challenge under some of these regulations to comply with the requirements.
And Dave, I have a question as well.
Sure.
So I know you talked about, of course, California with their low carbon fuel standard, and I know there are other states that have adopted a similar program. Now, I guess the distinction between the federal and the state program, or California's program, is the CI score, right? Whereas with the federal program, you're just thrown into a bin of either D3, D5, D4, or whatever. Do you see all states following California in that we would have a CI score, or do you see some states potentially just having a bin, just like the RFS?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the state. I do think that all of the policies, I think some of this is going to be, I'd caveat it as it's a timing thing, right? So how quickly do certain people start to adopt the CI score model? But I think from the EcoEngineers perspective, we see more programs leaning towards the carbon intensity model and less of the bucketing. I think the bucketing is an easy first step for programs. Having every single project have a score is obviously a complicated methodology, right? So California has to look and validate and maintain scores for hundreds and hundreds of projects individually. The federal program just, as you said, is a bucketing program and says, yep, this waste comes from a landfill, check the box, we know it gets this type of credit. So I think there is a complexity with every project having a score, but people are also focused on, they want to make sure that these programs are actually having the benefit that is claimed. And one way to validate that is by having everyone actually do their true input and output scoring of, how much energy they are putting in to produce this fuel. You can even see it, and I know somebody's going to be talking today about the Inflation Reduction Act, but even in that Inflation Reduction Act, there is provisions, especially with the new fuels like hydrogen and others, where they are going to be asking, the IRS is going to be validating some form of carbon intensity within that program. And so we're even seeing that federal policy sort of be informed by this like CI score or really, in California, there are some simplified models where you can use a lookup grid and sort of say, hey, my project has these three aspects and this is the score I get. But you have to really cleanly fit into those buckets of how you're doing, making your process work. So I do think there will be some states that'll do this big bucketing, but those I think are going to be the first steps. And I think as time goes on, you'll see them lean towards more and more of a CI score based model.
Okay.
And I think that's good news for industries that, especially in the manure industries and the food diversion industries where that is a benefit over other forms of fuel that are being manufactured, because you don't want to generate a fuel that requires you putting in twice as much energy, to make the fuel. That's not the goal of the programs. And I think some of those, volume-based, big bucketed programs, while not intended to do that, may have that effect if not administered correctly.
Dave, are you going to talk about how the CARB is changing?
Yeah, so I think one of the areas around where CARB is changing is, so we talked about the EPA proposed changes allowing the electricity pathways. California Air Resources Board for this LCFS program is also going through a rulemaking process and contemplating changes in the future. One of the areas where you can see their push is really about moving from fossil-based fuels, even being renewable natural gas, to a hydrogen-based fuel, and really pushing hydrogen and electrification as the two solutions in the transportation industry in California. Well, I think we have a large hydrogen practice at EcoEngineers, and we're working with customers who are building out hydrogen infrastructure, and the, Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of money allocated to hydrogen infrastructure. I think our concern is really around how quickly California believes that can happen. And so some of their policies seem a little aggressive in the transition of moving some of these vehicles and vehicle infrastructure and transportation infrastructure to hydrogen faster than technology can really keep up. So some of the changes are they would like renewable natural gas to be directed to hydrogen production. And so I don't think a lot of people see the policies that CARB are putting out to no longer allow a long-term movement of gas from states like in the East, like New York and others in the Midwest, to be able to essentially, inject your gas in New York and then be able to dispense it in a vehicle in California and say that the grid is interconnected. That's something they call book and claim. And California is sort of saying in long term, they don't want to allow book and claim of renewable natural gas in a pipeline from the East Coast or in the Midwest out to California. That rule already exists for electricity in the California marketplace. But there is this rule that carves out the ability to do that if you're going to use this renewable natural gas to hydrogen. And so I think what you're seeing is they're not trying to phase out renewable natural gas. They just want renewable natural gas to shift to hydrogen. And so I think the comments and the input they're going to get is that the RNG industry doesn't necessarily disagree with that, but it has to happen on a technology time frame, not just on a rule time frame that says, oh, by 2040, we're going to have all of this hydrogen infrastructure and all of the renewable natural gas can move to facilities that convert, natural gas into hydrogen. And so, I do think it'll be interesting how much feedback they get on that and where the policy actually lands. To me, it's about sending the signal that that's the infrastructure they want, to invest in. But there's still a significant amount of, compressed natural gas vehicles on the road in California, and continues to be investment in advancing those fleets. And people, I don't think, are ready to just invest in a hydrogen truck and replace their CNG fleet overnight. So, I do think you may see some of those timelines pushed out, but it'll be interesting to watch those policies. And then the second piece, Rashi, is really around how long your project gets to use those credits that we talked about from the past manure management practices. Essentially, they're setting some timelines to say, you're going to have potentially like a 10 to 15 year crediting period where you get that really beneficial low CI score. And then after that crediting period, you're going to be, essentially competing with landfill and other projects. I do think that, and this is really just an honest evaluation, I think that the way that some of the conceptual projects that Agrid works on, where they're really thoughtful about, combined heat and power and the use of on-site generation for electricity and heat, are, even if you take away those large credits, will be very competitive in the marketplace with, essentially zero CI solar or other fuels. And so I think that's what CARB wants, is they want people to be thoughtful about the way these facilities are constructed and the amount of energy they use to produce the energy. So,
our friend Paul Walcott was just talking about a farm that he's going to go visit, and
right.
he was talking about how they're bringing in gas to produce electricity.
Mm-hmm.
It feels really convoluted, when people do that kind of stuff. But
yeah, and so I was going to just quickly touch, and then I want to give time for questions. So this is actually a slide I had put together for a webinar that EcoEngineers did about 6 months ago, trying to talk to people about where their farms or where their projects might fit in these carbon credit areas. And so, 6 months to a year ago, you would look at, do you do a pipeline renewable natural gas project, or do you do an electricity project? And if you're a dairy farm in New York and you're looking at where's the revenue from these credits going to come from, in the past, if you did an RNG project, you would get these D3 RIN credits if you could, monetize those. You can move your gas to California and you could have potentially a score of minus 250 and generate a lot of LCFS credits. But there wasn't any tax incentive at that time. And so on the electricity side, there were some tax credits, some ITC tax credits for the investment, but you didn't qualify for either of these. And one of the reasons you didn't qualify for the California LCFS was because the electricity has to be interconnected with the California grid to qualify for this. And so that's one of the requirements there. You fast forward and look at the new EPA rule that I said came out in December, and you look at the new Inflation Reduction Act, and all of a sudden these things now change. And so this is some of the complications with these markets, and just making sure that you're up on the latest developments, is that now if you're doing an RNG project, there is in the Inflation Reduction Act some capacity here to qualify biogas and interconnection equipment for tax credits. But you also have this, now you can qualify by matching with electric vehicle charging for the D3 RFS credit. And so again, this one's real. The tax credit's real. This electricity one is still in the proposal phase, and we'll see where that goes during this year. But this can be a game changer for an electricity project that otherwise wasn't getting credits in the past. And then if there are state policies like the New York policy for electricity here, for vehicle charging, and you can stack them with the REC program, maybe this middle no for what is a quote unquote LCFS program is something's developed or finalized in New York to give benefit to renewable electricity, and you can get a REC or some other program. Now you potentially change this entire grid here. So I think this is where you really, even if you don't want to be an expert in these different crediting programs, having awareness of where your revenue is coming from and how it's going to be, how your project's going to, collect that revenue and share in it is an important part of making decisions about what investments you want to take place on your farm. And then I just have two charts in here that I think, will be part of the slide so you can have them. But this is the other piece of this, this challenge is these credit prices move every single day, and there's really no, if you participate in these markets, being prepared for what this can look like and the reasons behind these price changes is that these markets are still highly regulated, government programs in the form of the government's really setting, or the regulators are really setting what the supply and demand of these credits looks like. And so as they change policy and come out with these proposals and things happen in the marketplace, the one thing you can depend on is that credit prices are going to change. Knowing what they're going to be in the future is a real challenge. And so you can see even the LCFS price over the past, 8 years, at one point was trading near essentially what the cap of the program was, which is around $200. And today it's less than half that. It's around $80. Now, the California program, as Rashi said, is going through a proposal of updating their regulations, and they're not shy about saying that they see where this credit price is. They see that in their view, this means that the market's overperforming and more credits are being generated and the program's working faster and better than they anticipated. And they want this price to go up to incentivize and speed up the acceleration of cleaning up their transportation industry. And they're not shy about saying that, right? They're going to enact policies to try to get this price to be higher. The real question is when can they do that? So they're talking about increasing the goals of the program and making, the buyers of these credits, the people who have to buy them, buy more credits or have lower CI score between 2025 and 2030. So the real question is, does that have an impact in 2024, or, does that impact not really hit until 2025 or 2026? But there's definitely a clear signal that they want this price to be higher. And then the same thing happens with the RFS program. If you look at the green line here, which is really the credits that a manure project would generate, you've had things in the past like COVID and some other policies of administrations like these exemption policies that have driven some substantial dips in the market. But then also, for the past probably 2 years, we've seen really high D3 RIN prices sustained for a pretty long time. But now they've, some of these proposals that the EPA has come out with, there's concerns that maybe the obligations are too low, and you've seen sort of a recent, somewhat of a dip in prices, but nothing like we saw when, during the beginning of COVID, when people were really unsure about what this program would look like.
All right. Well, Dave, I want to just give everybody in the meeting an opportunity, to just dive into some questions. So I want to open the floor to everybody. Thanks so much, Dave, for shedding some light on this. I know it's a hot topic, and everybody's just trying to muddle through it. So are there any questions from anybody else on the call? Well, I'm thinking, just back to some of the introductory questions that we had, specifically John Vanderpaul from Texas. How does a dry lot dairy factor into this? How do they participate in these types of credit programs? And is there going to be a provision for them to be able to take advantage of this as well?
Yeah, so I think the program is really built on, especially these LCFS programs are built on the what's happening today on your at your facility and what are the emissions that are being avoided by implementing a project. And so right now by rule, even beef cattle or dry lots don't really qualify because they can qualify. Let me put it that way. There's not a rule that says they can't qualify, but they don't compete in the market from a scoring perspective because there's no emissions from manure, that's essentially in a lagoon undergoing anaerobic digestion. If you have dry lots or manure spread on fields, essentially you have aerobic digestion and you don't have the generation of the methane from the manure that you would have from a lagoon. So the challenge there is that they can generate the D3 credits. The feedstock qualifies in that federal program, but from these other programs that look at the CI score, they just don't have the same baseline or don't have the same dynamics as a program where you've got a manure going to a lagoon.
That's exactly what happened. I spent 2 years trying to do an RNG project here in New York, and we didn't have a manure lagoon, and we could not get any of that California money. And for the guys that are in other states, the RINs and the LCF score, the money, Californians are waking up. I'm not sure how long that California money is lasting. The Californians aren't real excited about spending a whole lot of money going all over the country to do projects. They're smarting up. They're going to do them in California. So I think guys that are trying to figure out where they want to go, that somehow the funding is going to have to come from their state. There's not going to be money from California forever.
Yeah, and one thing that we didn't talk about is I think the advancement of what we would call the voluntary markets. We are working and see a lot of requests from large multinational companies who want to find a way to lower their greenhouse gas emissions, and they want to participate in projects or buy fuel from places that are really helping them lower their emissions profile. And renewable natural gas purchases are one of those things, and they do understand the benefit of gas from different agricultural projects. And I think it is another market that's available that would be completely outside of these credit programs. And it's really people, really big, multinational companies with great credit that say, I want to participate in these programs or these projects and buy gas from a dairy farm for 10 years or a waste food project, instead of buying, gas from a well. So, I do see the continued interest and actual transactions happening in the market. And I think we are helping to communicate to those companies what is the benefit of buying gas from a dairy project or another project that has a lower CI score.
So maybe Rashi can share with us that. So UGI bought about a third of Ag Grid Energy. I don't know is it UGI's intent to participate in programs like that?
So I think I was going to say, like, my view real quick is that we see that in a number of areas where I was at a conference yesterday, and Nat Grid, National Grid's got a lot of utilities in the Northeast, and they've got a decarbonization by 2050 goal. And, talking to their team, they know that renewable natural gas needs to be a part of that if they're going to continue to supply gas in their infrastructure and say that their grids are net zero. So I think you see the utilities are looking forward to trying to figure out how they can have, find an ability to pay for the RNG and have it pass through to their customer base. But I think they also see that there are large customers coming to them who are interested in these type of purchases. So I think you're going to see like big companies lead that. And then the second phase will be states and utilities trying to figure out how do we, socialize the cost of this across everyone, just like they did with solar development and wind development and renewable power. But that's kind of my view.
I think all let's wait for Lauren Ray to talk. I think there's going to be more conversation about New York. New York is not following California, and it's got a very different way, and I personally like it. So let's talk about that because I do think there's going to be a battle between energy end products, and New York's looking at it as hard to electrify sectors versus easy to electrify sectors. And I kind of say keep it simple, stupid. We're going to go with where the simpler set of rules and regulations are. And for that reason, we are very much into the electricity because it's just simple. So yeah, let's just, I think Paul, your question is definitely going to be answered by the time we get to Lauren.
Yeah. And John, I think it looked like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, David, I just had a question on, I know we haven't finalized the rules for electricity yet, but do you think the RIN values will be different there from natural gas or renewable gas, or will it all run on the same scales?
So if the feedstocks are the same, so if you look at a pure dairy manure project and it qualifies for that D3 RIN, whether you're generating it through renewable natural gas or electricity, they'll be the same credit. The people who have to buy those credits, you'll be able to know that they came from one or the other just because of the way the program works, but really the credits will not have any different value, being from electricity or being from CNG. And I think the real question is, the thing that really will drive the pricing is what is the EPA, requiring people to buy from a credit standpoint, and then how many credits can get generated through these different, pathways. And the EPA definitely wants that price to be somewhere where investment in the fuels industry continues to happen, but the price doesn't run away that it's so high that it becomes sort of more of a PR burden to them to say, this is passing on a large tax to people buying gas at the pump. So I think that's what'll really affect the pricing more than anything. But yeah, at the end of the day, you're generating the same credit and there won't be a difference.
Jason, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. Dave, thanks for your presentation here. I guess a couple of questions, but one is really dealing with, we've got many projects in the state on farms right now that are starting to come up against the 2 10-year periods with the car registration. And I'm wondering, what strategies these farms might have moving forward if they, maybe could enter a volunteer market afterwards, or if you think car might extend another 10-year period.
So in the cap and trade car program?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of options there. They could, if they can look at an electricity pathway, they could look at an RNG pathway, and these programs don't have, like the RFS program, for the electricity for the RINs, has no crediting period. So, if you produce fuel for the next 30 years, as long as the program is there and the requirements are there, there's not an expiration of the credits that you get to generate. So I think there are definitely options for them to look at, continued crediting programs. And even if they're just, one of the things that, somebody in our team is looking at is trying to help, incremental project, like the first step being a crediting program as well. So, if you have a lagoon and you can cover it and start flaring until you get a project developed, an electricity project in there or an RNG project that might take a couple of years. For those first couple of years, how do you participate in a voluntary market like that and maybe generate some credits by just doing step one, until you get to the bigger project, and helping to, potentially just fund that next project through a little bit of revenue.
Sure. Okay. We also have a farm that has a cover and flare on one storage and is adding one to a second, but hasn't changed any herd demographics. And so it seems like there's no additionality in the eyes of some of these marketplaces as a result.
I think a project like that, it definitely could qualify if they're doing it and it's not a mandated. If it's not mandated and they're doing it, voluntarily, I think they could qualify for that second flare and that covering. I think you could potentially qualify for additionality and generate some voluntary credits.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
then we have a team. We've been building a team probably over the past 18 months, really, on the voluntary space, where we look at a lot of these projects and then try to, figure out, do they fit, and then wonder what methodology, what is the credit value, sort of what does that look like for projects, so we can help navigate that as well.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, yeah. Are we over time at all, or is there time?
Yeah, I think I might have yours be the last question, then we'll move over to Allison.
Okay, hopefully this is quick, Dave, but I guess a question that I think I have a little bit, but also farms would probably have, is if they are participating, maybe with California's LCFS right now, and we're going to and producing RNG, I mean, is there going to be an option, and maybe it's up to the project developer that they're working with, but for that project to move to actually the electricity side by providing that RNG instead to an electricity, charging station for vehicles, for example? Is that sort of an option in the future?
It would be an option in the future. So I think if you were starting from like a greenfield project, you probably wouldn't make like the RNG investment to upgrade the gas pipeline quality and do that, make that capital investment to then go to electricity. But if you have that infrastructure in place and you sort of went through the California process for 10 or 15 years, and then, you're not going to get that really low score, you will be able to match that renewable natural gas with electricity generation somewhere off site, and participate in that electricity like RFS program. So it is another sort of like long-term, way of shifting the RNG. And I think that's one area where like the pipeline quality gas could potentially go to electricity in the future, or hydrogen. There's some optionality there, if you already have a renewable natural gas facility. So I don't think like, oh, your credit period ends and now you have no way of monetizing the fuel. I think it's just going to be, at that time, what's your next best option?